Andrea, you'll be turning 50 soon, and you've began a series of interviews with women to explore their lives and also to share yours. And I was wondering if you can tell us your own journey in the last almost 50 years. What can you share with us in terms of the key highs and the lows that have truly defined who you are today?
I don't know if we have enough time, but I'm absolutely delighted that you've asked, and thank you for having me. In starting in July last year, I usually go into the end of the year with a very constructive, robust process of how I'm going to shape the following year. It's you could call it a bit woo-woo, a bit scientific, and also a bit factual. And it takes probably about a week. And I usually do it either, depending on how I feel, either on my birthday as the year or as the end of the year. And as I was kind of approaching my birthday last year, I didn't feel quite ready and I couldn't quite land with what I wanted to achieve. So I was starting to percolate, doing all these interviews. And of course, then in December and January, I started to put together my kind of year in advance. And it was the first time in my entire life that I had entered a year with peace and contentment. I had never felt that sense of what will be, will be. I had always kind of pushed the mountain. I was always going to conquer the world. I was going to tackle everything. And I really went in with a sense of calm, a sense of peace. Now, that doesn't mean that I slow down or that I have less energy. Let me tell you, I am the energizer bunny, as most people will tell you. But it was just a sense of contentment. And I still, it kind of shocks and awes me, but I believe it is because of some of the learnings that I've had from interviewing people like yourself and learning from others. And also, I mean, this sounds kind of maybe odd, but like a bit of self-comparison and social comparison. You're thinking to yourself, gosh, I'm not good enough. I've not done enough. Like, I'm not that smart. I'm not that capable. And then you start to think about this incredible life you've lived. And then you hear other people that you would put on pedestals and you think, well, gosh, they've lived an incredible life too, just in different atmospheres. And so it's been a real incredible process of validation, contentment, education, experience. And I'm kind of thinking like I need to keep it going. The idea of it ending is really devastating for me. I'm interviewing a monk 2 weeks from now as an example, and I can't wait. And I just think, gosh, what an unbelievable opportunity to interview people from so many different walks of life.
How beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. So, Andrea, I'd love for you to share with our audience your own journey in the last decades. The key things you have shared when we last spoke were phenomenal. And I'd love for everyone to discover the amazing things and the amazing journey that you have had. So take us through the biggest highs and lows that have really inspired you and have led you to where you are today.
Sure. I firstly want to say I'm Canadian, which I know you reside in my home nation, but I've been in Australia since 1998. So I was raised about 5 years on Vancouver Island, and then the rest of my years in and around Edmonton, Alberta, which for the Canadians who are listening will know that it's, minus 25 to minus 40 for 6 months of the year. When I arrived in Australia in the 90s, and everyone was like, how can you leave Canada? I said, have you ever been to Edmonton? I said, oh, no. I said, well, that's why. So my father's Australian and my mother is of Ukrainian background and heritage. And I was raised in a very multicultural, very diverse thinking home. We were not wealthy by any means. We were not white collar. My father was a car salesman and my mother was a secretary for most of her life through political parties. And there was some incredible skills that I learned. And I always share the story of my dad because people go, oh, car salesman. And that's not how it ever framed to me. My father was all about relationships. He was all about building connection with people, and not just for the sake of the sale, but for the fact that it was an experience throughout his day as well. And because he built these incredible relationships with people, And we were in Edmonton in the 90s. And because he's a, 5'6" Australian guy, which is humorous as a starting point. It's like, the Australian, the Ukrainian, and the Canadian walk into the bar. It sounds like the starting of a joke. But he had this great charisma and this ability to build relationships. And somehow he had met a gentleman by the name of Glenn Sather, who at the time was the coach of the Edmonton Oilers. And it was at the rise of the Edmonton Oilers, and Glenn had all of these incredible athletes who had joined the team and were starting to shape what will now be known forever as one of the most incredible hockey teams of our time. Gretzky, Mark Messier, Yari Curry, Grant Fuhr, and Dad ended up building relationships with all of these guys. And so he was selling cars to NHL players and building relationships with them and their families at the beginning of their career when they were really nervous and scared, but also being given a ton of money for the first time in their lives. And I'll never forget my dad standing in front of Georges Larocque, who ended up playing for the Montreal Canadiens after the Edmonton Oilers. Massive, big guy. And my dad, 5'6", and George is like, "Oh, Mr. Culligan, I'm going to buy a very fancy car." He's French. That's my terrible French-Canadian accent. Apologies to everyone on the call. "I want to buy a fancy car, and, I want to get a sports car." And my dad, like, shaking his finger up at him, having to look up and saying, "George, you need to think about the winter, and you need to think about pragmatism. So we'll get you a fancy truck, but you can get some mag wheels on it." So all this time observing my father build relationships really was this starting point of looking for problems, helping other people, and really solving those issues for them in some context or another. So my father really taught me a lot about that. I then was, of course, inspired by his sense of travel and adventure. And my grandparents had immigrated from the Ukraine. So we always had multi-languages spoken in our home. Although at the time, in the 70s and 80s, when you emigrated to Canada, it was not acceptable for you to speak your language. I shouldn't say it wasn't acceptable. It just was thought to not be as respectful to Canada, which is kind of sad because it meant that I missed the opportunity to really learn Ukrainian, but it also meant that my mother and my baba or my grandmother could talk about me behind my back, which I always knew I was in trouble when I'd hear, Ukrainian, then my name, then Ukrainian, and then someone would look at me and then I go, "Oh God, I'm in trouble again." Anyways, I was raised with my grandparents mostly on their farm through summer holidays and winter breaks, and then learning from my father. And then in the late 90s, I decided I was going to come to Australia. And it was meant to be a 3-month holiday. I have dual citizenship because of my father. And well, that kicked off an incredible adventure. So I traveled for about 18 months, living in the most remote places of Australia, doing things that I told people I could do, like guide kayaking trips, run bars, hostels, doing all these things that I said, yes, of course, I've lots of experience. Anyways, I ended up doing that, having a great time and landing back in Sydney in 1998, 99, just at the peak of the dot-com boom. And I suppose the big milestone there was I started to enter the tech industry and start to get a foray into what did startup life look like? So I realize I've been talking for about 10 minutes, but I mean, those are some pretty big milestones that started a change in how I perceived the world and what I expected from it and what I wanted more of.
Amazing. Love the journey you have already shared until now. Since you ended this with the startup adventure or curiosities that you had at the time, I know you mentioned in our last conversation that you built a lot of wealth and lost it as well. Take us through that journey and the emotions that you must have felt and the exhilaration in actually accumulating so much success and wealth and then losing it all. And how did you actually get back up to want to continue building other things in the future?
Yeah, I'll take you on a bit of a journey because there's plenty of context around this that's important to understand. I started one of Australia's first free email services in the 90s, which for anyone over the age of 40 will know that you used to have to pay for bandwidth. But of course, anyone under the age of 40 looks at me like I'm a little bit insane when I tell them that, especially when I speak to the grads every day. They're like, "What?" Anyways, I'm like, "Yeah, you used to have to pick up a phone as well." So, I was in the peak of the dot-com boom. I think ignorance is bliss in that I had no idea what I was doing. Started to work with the top 150 companies across Australia and in the world, and then just identified problems. And from there, started another 7 businesses across Australia, Canada, and India. And it was an incredible journey. I'll never forget my first dividend check and being able to pay off my car loan in full. That feeling as a 20-something-year-old, being able to pay $40,000 off your car, that was an incredible feeling. And the business did extremely well. I won the Young Telstra Businesswoman of the Year Award, which is one of our big business awards here. We also won the Small Business of the Year Award. At the time, we were on the Fast 100 lists. Everything was going very well. And then I exited a company. I sold a business. And the gentleman who bought that business ended up suing me for negligence during due diligence, which went to district court, which is the kind of first phase, and we lost. And it absolutely devastated me. I don't think you can ever describe the feeling of being in court or being in those moments until you've been there. And it was the beginning of a very difficult road. So we lost in district court. We also, my business partner and I decided to end our business relationship, which is kind of like a divorce. And the years leading up to it were extremely difficult. We then took it to the Supreme Court, which we got a 100% unanimous agreement in our favor, which was great. But then they applied to take it to the High Court, which is the only way you can go to the High Court. You have to apply to take a case to the High Court. Then you stand in the courtroom, you get 20 minutes on either side, and then they make a judgment as to whether or not they'll take the case through. And we stood there for 20 minutes and the light went on, which meant their time was over, and the judge let them keep going. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to keep going. The judge let them keep going, eventually stopped them, and then apologized to me in the courtroom and said, Ms. Culligan, we're so sorry. The legal system has failed you. This should not have come this far. But by this stage, I was already pretty deep into what I would call extreme stress. The business was growing at 120% per year. I was about to get married. We just bought a house. I had just finished the lawsuit that cost us millions. And even though we won, they declared bankruptcy, which meant we lost all the costs and opportunity to pay our legal fees back. Then we got hit by the GFC. So all of these things combined really took its toll. In 2009, my then husband and I decided to take a trip and go and meet all of our friends and family. He was English, I was Canadian. We had friends all over the world, and we were going to do 7 countries in 5 weeks. Just one hot tip: do not do this to yourself. Do not do this to yourself. About a week in, I started to get severe panic attacks, but not knowing what they were. And mental health was not something that people really spoke about publicly. It was very dramatic, like, oh, they've got depression, their life has changed, or they've got anxiety. That's the way that it was communicated in it's almost 20 years ago. So I was terrified of what I was feeling. I thought I was schizophrenic. I thought I didn't know what was happening. And here I was on this world tour having to be really nice to everyone and show up as my best self and meeting my future mother-in-law. And it was torture. I got back to Australia. I went and saw doctors and went on to medication, went and saw a psychologist. I had a twice-a-week psychologist appointment for 6 months, and I was diagnosed with severe panic disorder. No one knew, not one person except my husband at the time. That took about a year to go through, alongside very financial challenging distress. And then as we were heading into the global financial crisis, we just couldn't recover. We couldn't recover the funds, the momentum, and then we had one big client that pulled the pin due to their funds also being removed. And so we had to put one of our businesses into voluntary administration, and everything started to collapse. I don't know if I can ever describe the feeling of having to stand in front of, 40, 50 people that you respect and care for and know their families and their situations, and say that as of today, you will no longer be paid, you no longer have a job, and I know you've worked hard, but unfortunately the business is closing. And then also, anyone who tells you that running your own business is just business is lying to you. It is so personal. And it was a deep realization that my entire ego was connected to the success of that business and my identity and who I was and what that meant. And so we lost everything. We lost every single penny. I had people trying to take me to court. I had letters showing up at my doorstep that were threats. And it was the most horrific time that I've ever experienced. Now, that was a life MBA that you could never describe in a classroom. So I'd had this effectively a nervous breakdown. Then I'd gone into the GFC. Then the business went into voluntary administration. And my husband at the time, it's not like I've had many husbands. It's just I was married. I'm no longer married. He said, now's the time. Like, let's just travel. And so I really thank him for that sense of adventure that he offered us. And we sold whatever else we had left. And we flew to Canada and bought a caravan. And a fifth wheel, which Canadians on the call will know. In Australia, we call it a caravan. And ended up traveling for almost 2 years. Now, the process back, on reflection, I wish I would have given myself more space. I was still panicking of where the money was going to come. How were we going to afford things? My husband had worked with me for quite some time and didn't have any additional revenue coming in or cash or capital. And I was just panicking of where we were going to get the money. So I was trying to find consulting gigs whilst being in a caravan, which in 2013 was not cool. Now it's so cool. But now that at the time it wasn't okay. And for the next 2 years, I did 3 big buckets of things. I slept almost 16 hours a day. I was absolutely punted. I read so many books. I think I read 50 books in the first 5 months. A lot about guilt, fear, shame, identity. I just needed to understand more about it. And then I did a series of self-development experiences, which included all kinds of different things. There were courses, there were therapists. And then there was also traveling across Asia. So living in yoga centers and ashrams and retreats across India, Cambodia, Vietnam, even in Quebec. I went to a beautiful retreat, a big yoga ashram center that I spent a number of weeks in. And so it was a blend of things that was unintentional, but was desperately needed to regain a perspective of what I wanted to really get out of life and what was important to me. And so, I still question, hence the interviews, what do I want to be when I grow up? But at the time, I had a little bit more clarity by then.
Wow, what an incredible journey, Andrea. Thank you so much for sharing. What does your identity stand on today as a result of everything that you have gone through?
What a great question. I've worked with an incredible coach for the past 10 years. And the first thing that we tackled was the perspective of failure. I had felt a deep sense of failure as a wife. I'd ended my marriage. As a business owner, I'd lost my business. As a sister, I hadn't lived in my home country and hadn't really been there for my family. As a daughter, everything really, when I unpicked it, I had felt this deep sense of failure. It took 6 months of very intense approach on failure. But when I cracked the code on that one, that was a game changer. It provided so much clarity on the value of failure and what does failure actually mean. So do you view failure as the end? Do you view failure as the only perspective or that there's no growth? I absolutely shifted from that's failure to a sense of growth. And a lot of people might say, oh, you failed, now you have to go back and fix it, or that wasn't where I went. What I ended up doing was just getting so clear on who I get to choose to be. And that sense of choice was a wild concept for me. I also didn't have like a super easy childhood. I love my parents, but it was a very tricky time growing up. And I always used that as this story for how and why I showed up. And when I started to pull that away and actually have to sit in my own identity, my own sense of self, and front all that failure of like, oh, well, guess what, sister? Like, you're not perfect either. But you get a choice. You get a choice as to how you want to show up each day. And so I started to make some pretty clear decisions on how I wanted to show up. And the word integrity, I'd say, underpins pretty much everything, which means in my mind, you do what you say. And So if I say that I'm going to be someone who believes in relationships, that means I've got to have the hard conversations as well as the beautiful conversations. If I say that I'm going to be on time, that means I'm going to be on time. And if I'm not on time and I show up late, there's no excuse. Oh, well, traffic was late. That's on you, babe. So it really helped me develop a clear sense of identity on integrity by fronting all of the things that I perceived as failure and instead defined them as growth, and then focused on choice. And choosing to be that person is actually really hard. It takes so much time and intensity. And I have so many beautiful young people that I get to meet with and mentor. And they ask me, if you were to invest money into one thing for yourself, like at my age, what would it be? And I'm like, therapy, coach, something. Like, don't worry about the personal trainer. You find that on YouTube. Don't worry about the nutritionist. You can source that on ChatGPT. Getting to know yourself is the most incredible gift I have ever given myself. My father's 75, and he called me on his 70th birthday, and he said, I just want to tell you something. And I said, oh, what's that? And he said, you've given me the most beautiful gift I could have ever received. And I said, what's that? He said, you know yourself more than I ever will. And it is not, I think, getting to know yourself, that's joy. That to me is joy. Like, oh, this is who I am, cool. And this is who I choose to be, amazing. So anyways, my answers are very long, I realize.
But your answers are also very inspiring and very beautiful. Yeah, so no worries.
Thank you.
Since you touched upon joy, let's dive a little bit more on that topic. What does joy look like for you today? Do you have a recipe for living more joyfully?
I think, I love when you use the word joy, Andrea, because you're like, have more joy. And people go, yes, like that sounds so easy. It's not easy. Like those are hard things to do because it is also about choice, right? It is also about how you choose to be in that moment. I'll give you a simple example. I love emceeing and keynotes. I love them because I love being able to influence and inspire change. I love to be able to have people walk away and go, I can do that. And when I first started doing speaking gigs, I used to have people come up to me and go, oh, that was so amazing. I could never do that. And I thought, well, what the heck is my job here? Like, I don't want to do this anymore. That meant that I had to change how I was showing up, right? Like, how was I speaking and how was I bringing people in versus just inspiring? I wanted to really influence that sense of change. And that meant how I show up, but that also meant that, even this week, literally last Thursday, I was asked to MC a full day event for our firm. And, my immediate response is like, God, I don't want to do this. And I still did a fair bit of that. Let me be clear. I'm not perfect, but I also love it. And so that meant that when people said, gosh, you did such a good job, or we love having you on stage, it wasn't me going, oh God, yeah, well, it was such a pain. That was me responding with, yeah, I loved it. It was great. Wasn't it fun? And that importance of gratitude, I think, is where that would be my recipe for joy. I recently repartnered about 5 years ago, and it's been a real wild paradigm shift for me because I used to view the principle of success is ambition. Have you conquered the world? Great, that's success. And meeting this incredible person, this man has really changed my life in so many ways. And it's also at the right time of my life. I met him when I was 45 or 44, and he's also older than I am. He's about 17 years older than I am, and he's been married before. And so we come from a place of a few scars and a bit of wisdom and a big capacity for learning. And every day, I consciously, even though it's not that hard because he's fabulous, I consciously wake up and say wonderful things about how grateful I am for our relationship. And it's not, oh, I'm grateful for us. It's things like, I love how we communicate. Or he brings me a coffee in bed every morning, by the way. And that's something to get excited about every day anyways. So it's these small moments of gratitude when I can be complacent or I could be frustrated. The moment I throw a gratitude lens on it, I get extremely joyful. Oh, my friend is droning on about her divorce. Gosh, I'm so lucky that she calls me. That gives me joy, but it is hard, and I find it is a defined choice, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. How beautiful. And as you look back on your journey so far, do you have any regrets? And if you would have a magic wand, is there anything that you would change?
So I don't regret, but the one thing I wish I would have told myself in my 20s was to be bolder, to take more risks. As I get older, it's different. Risks feel different, and they're different types of risks. And life, probably for me, has become a lot more intentional. In my 20s, that beautiful gift of naivety is such an incredible experience of like, I don't know what I'm doing, and just diving in. And there's plenty of moments I look back and I go, gosh, I'm so embarrassed I said that or I did that, or no, because I didn't know any better and I thought I was so smart. But that also got me all these other things. So it's not a regret, but maybe just because I'm so glad the way that life has turned out, all the hard times and all the difficult bits. But yeah, I would have told myself to go a little bolder, definitely, which is saying something.
What advice would you give to the youth that are possibly aspiring to start their own ventures, become entrepreneurs? What does it actually look like when you're saying, be more bold? What message would you have for them?
So simple things, right? So when I joined Deloitte 7 years ago, they said, "Oh, we're going to give you a Lenovo or an HP laptop. Which would you prefer?" And I said, "Can I have a Mac?" And they said, "Yeah, yeah, sure, no problem." And so then I walked around with this MacBook for 2 years, and every time I sat in a meeting room, someone would say, "How did you get a Mac?" And I said, "I just asked." So I guess my piece of, I don't know if it's wisdom or just ask. Like, just ask for the money. Just do the thing. But you literally nothing to lose, right? You live in your friend's basement on the couch. It doesn't matter. And to be honest, you can do that at any stage of life. But in your 20s, the beautiful sense of ignorance means that you can ask the questions that no one else is asking without the fear that comes with knowledge and experience. People constantly ask me, why did you join a very big consulting firm? And I joined not knowing anything about how a partnership worked. Had I known, would I have joined? Debatable. Now, I've also had an incredible 7 years at the firm. It's offered me global expansion, Asia Pacific roles, like just incredible experience. But it's a different kind of hard. It's a complex. And if people, if you would have said to me exactly what it was like, would I have joined? I don't know. It's unlikely. So the naivety of not knowing and being bold in these moments of like jumping into it. One of the insights I've had of interviewing 30 something people, both men and women, men just jump in. They just go, I just took the challenge. I took the opportunity. I asked for this. I did this. And women wait for structure and systems and process to be in place. And it's really made me observe that neither is right or wrong, but perhaps a little bit of both could be valuable, right? So I'm trying to think more in that mindset of just go ask, just go do the thing, just go have the conversation. Because as a woman, I'm second guessing and, but what if they think this? And what if they, sometimes it gets worse as you get older. Whereas especially in your youth, it's just go nuts, ask the questions, ask for the thing, do the thing.
What is your view on how the world will shift for all generations as a result of the massive AI acceleration that we're seeing?
People will be reading about this as a history lesson in 75 years of geopolitics, of technology, of industrial revolution, of energy transition, all of these things happening at once. Usually we would deal with one of these at one time. And it is unbelievable the amount of, I would say, overwhelm that I know executives are experiencing, myself included. You wake up and you're like, what part of the world has changed for me today every morning? And it's a really confronting place to be. What I've observed and what I'm seeing is that in all of these moments of major change, so let's call the global financial crisis, let's call wars, these are where the future opportunities lie. Crisis develops creativity every time. 3M was born out of war products. Airbnb was created out of GFC because people couldn't afford their rent and their mortgage, so they were renting out bedrooms. These moments are where opportunities are shaped. But that does take a couple of things. That does take a growth mindset, and it does take an openness for using technologies and systems that may be new. And so the importance of understanding how to use AI is critical. We all need to know how to use it with a responsible and ethical mindset, but then determining how can you solve some of the most complex problems through the use of AI. An event we had on Tuesday, we had Dr. Scott Pemberthy, who is one of the distinguished engineers at Google. There's like a handful of these guys across the world. And he presented for 45 minutes. I do not proclaim to understand 80% of what he shared. It was, I just felt smarter for sitting in the room, but he was using and is continuing to use the application of AI and looking at adjacencies of building videos and how you use AI to build videos to then apply that to DNA strains, adjacent medicines, and cancer. And had already, through his work with his teams, won 2 Nobel Peace Prizes. So I think when we look at the future, the most important skills will be human and the coupled application of technology. So creativity, innovation, relationship building, the ability to communicate and engage, bring people with you, but enable technology to be able to solve the most complex problems. I think the future is incredible. I think we are entering a new world era where there will be some disruption until we get there.
I want to connect the dots now between what you mentioned earlier, the value of exploring who you truly are, and AI. Reading more and more that certain individuals are actually using AI as a means for therapy. What are your thoughts on that?
So firstly, don't use AI as your primary therapist. I just want to be really clear about that. There is something so powerful about nuance. And I'll use a couple of examples. My coach will ask me to say certain words, and it is fascinating to watch your visceral response to a word. So if you say, I'm a failure, you could put that into ChatGPT and you could say, tell me what I resolved to say I'm a failure. My coach, and what you can work with in that, it's a very basic example. If you are challenged with certain things, your annotations on those words, and gosh, you'll know more about this than I will with your background. The annotations of the visceral response of those words coming out will tell more of a story than a binary response of how do I deal with this? And I was working through not like massive imposter syndrome a couple of years ago, sitting in a very intelligent organization and a woman who never went to university. There was an underpinning of like, what the heck am I doing here? Why do I don't belong here? And so I would say words like, I'm not very smart. And the way that I would say them would actually provide the context versus just the terms. So having the value of someone who knows and has the structure and the nuance is so much more important than a binary to a one-way discussion. I will, however, say that when I am trying to get something across to another individual that I may be struggling with, there are some times when I would use AI to understand a profile and then how would I engage that person. So there's 4 or 5 people that I generally struggle with getting my message across. And there's a number of reasons for that. Some people just don't like you. Some people have very different communication styles. Some people need to see different things in the conversations that you're having. And of course, I'm working across all different types of levels of executives across all different sectors. So I have created profiles for these particular individuals based on their mannerisms, their behaviors, the words that they use, their roles, their titles, and the expectations that they have in every conversation. And then I would use AI to say, I'm meeting with that particular person. This is what I need to get across. How should I shape the discussion? From a self-awareness perspective, though, cannot recommend enough the good old therapist / psychologist, whatever works for you. I've had a coach for a decade. I've used psychologists, as I mentioned, therapists, and a lot of people have looked down on the idea of that. When you say that, they're like, oh gosh, like, is there something wrong with you? No, man, I'm skyrocketing through this life. And it is the unfair advantage, as far as I'm concerned, knowing who you are, how you operate in the world, where the gaps are. That's the game changer. That will give you the speed to operate in life that you can't get in any other mechanism, my opinion.
Love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And if you could choose three words to describe yourself today, based on everything you have learned about yourself, what would those three words be?
Goodness. Open, flawed.
Oh, beautiful. I love that.
Well,
We're
I
all
think
we
that
all have flaws. We all have flaws. Right. No
exactly.
one is perfect. I think we have to embrace that reality that even perfection is something we should not aim for, because if we even attain that, it means that we stop growing, we stop evolving, while everything else
So
around us
boring.
is, right.
Yeah, two things. One of the books I read when I did my little sabbatical and kind of recovery phase was called The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. And it's not one of her more famous books, but it was a book I needed to read at the time. And it has, I think, 11 or 12 different guiding lights throughout the book. I would read them, then I'd read it again, then I'd read one, then I just kept going back to it over and over and over again. And it was this celebration of, the imperfections of yourself. And it made me realize of, what do I love about people? I don't love that they speak perfectly or they dress perfectly or they always show up perfectly. I love it when someone sits down there and goes, oh my God, I've completely screwed this up. Let me tell you how I did it. And you're like, yes, tell me more. And that's where this incredible human connection's created. The second thing is, I used to get like little bits of Botox every once in a while. And now I'm really trying to embrace. Every once in a while, I do look in the mirror and see my mother, but I am really just embracing the beautiful lines that are coming with age and that are coming from smiling and facial expressions and frowning. And I smoked when I was a teenager and, drank vodka and, all of these things are the beautiful tapestry that get expressed on a face. And I'm really trying to embrace that a lot more. I do spend a lot of money on skincare. I'm not going to lie, but yeah, that's been something I'm really actively trying to do.
It's interesting. I was speaking with a guest, and I really love this analogy that they were referring to, that we need to embrace life as a journey, and it's almost as if we go through different seasons,
Yeah.
right? So in our young days, it's like the spring, then you have the summer, and then you reach the autumn, and then the winter. And it's really about embracing the acceptance that this is what life is all about, at least today, right? I know
Yeah.
there's a lot of longevity initiatives out there, and many possibilities of us even living beyond 100, right? And that brings even so many questions to mind. It's just fascinating. And I believe that it's truly all about accepting situations that emerge that we cannot control, whether it's the wrinkles of the situations that people taking you to court, as you've described. I mean,
Yeah.
crazy situations. And it's just embracing the reality and accepting it, and seeing the light in the darkness. And the quicker we can get to the acceptance phase, whatever stage we may be at, the more peace we can achieve. And it seems like you are at this level where you have been through so much that your capacity for acceptance has just skyrocketed, and hence why possibly you were feeling so much peace and harmony, as you've described,
Man, I don't
just a
know.
couple of months ago. And
Yeah.
I just absolutely love that.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? There's plenty of things I am not accepting very well. I don't love gravity. I would love to have my 28-year-old body back. I'd love to be able to sleep 8 hours a night. I mean, there's lots of things that I'm just struggling with acceptance. But yeah, you're right. You're right. I think I live in a suburb where there's a lot of older people, and it is so wonderful in the morning at like 5:30 in the morning. This is, Australia. The beaches are full. Everybody's exercising and all ages, and to see groups of 80 somethings just there's no hesitation in, donning a swimsuit and, changing into your shorts at the side of the car. And that's a very strange thing to do. And then the sense of joy that they're experiencing every morning. I mean, it just makes me want to retire, if I'm honest. But
And be at the beach all the time.
oh my gosh, yes, please.
Is there anything that you would have liked to share or talk about today that we did not yet touch upon?
Oh gosh, there's plenty of things we could have covered. I think maybe just the final point is I am genuinely curious about what's next. And I don't think I've ever been so open to whatever possibility that would be, and yet at the same time quite intentional and excited and content at the same time, which is a very new feeling that I'm just thoroughly enjoying.
Wonderful. And if there would be a challenge that you could give our listeners in order to elevate their joy, elevate their boldness that you talked about earlier, what would that challenge be?
Oh gosh, go tell that person you love them. Mom, dad, friend, even my guy friends, I tell them I love them. You never know when it's the last time. Every voice note I leave for my friends, my dad, my brother, go tell that person you love them. It's like I saw something the other day that someone said, gosh, love is hard. And someone said, love is the best. It's the biggest roller coaster journey that you will actually, relationships are all about finding out who we are. And whether that be with yourself or your parents or your siblings or, how I am around my mother, I'm not great. So I find out a lot about myself. How I am around my partner, I'm great. Finding out these different things about ourselves. So go tell that person that you love them.
Well, Andrea, thank you so much for everything you have shared. And your journey is absolutely incredible and so inspiring. May the next 50 or 100 years be even more extraordinary. Thank you so
Who
much.
wants to live that long? Thank you so much for having me. It was great to speak with you again. I really appreciate your time.